I had spent a lifetime believing the ocean could heal anything, that a quiet cruise with my granddaughter would be the perfect farewell to stress. Her laughter, the sunlit decks, the endless horizon, it all felt untouchable, until she came running breathless, eyes wide with terror, and clung to me, and whispered that someone on this ship wanted me dead tonight. The deck light shimmered on her tear-streaked face, the wind tossing strands of her hair across her eyes. Her hands clutched at my shirt with a desperation that made my chest tighten, each word trembling out of her like it was burning her tongue. They're going to make it look like an accident. Grandpa, you have to leave. Tonight. My breath caught in my throat. For a heartbeat, the chatter of other passengers, the music from the lounge, the distant hum of engines, all of it vanished. It was just me, her, and the taste of salt in the air, and the realization that the people she feared weren't strangers. I crouched so we were eye to eye, my voice steady even as my pulse thundered. Tell me everything, exactly as you heard it. She glanced over her shoulder before leaning in, her whisper ragged. They're going to put something in your drink, make you sleepy. Then she swallowed hard, her tiny fists tightening. Then they'll take you outside, and no one will see you again. The world tilted, not because the ship rocked, but because her words tore through everything I believed was safe. I'd survived storms, financial ruin, heartbreak, but nothing prepared me for the thought that my own flesh and blood could be plotting my death. I forced a calm I didn't feel, brushing a tear from her cheek. You did the right thing telling me. You're braver than most grown-ups I know. But inside, I was already sifting through possibilities, each one darker than the last. I couldn't run, not yet, and I couldn't let her stay near them for a second longer than necessary. Here's what we're going to do. I murmured, my grip gentle but unshakable. You're going to the kids' movie night, and you're not leaving until I come for you. No detours. No trips back to the cabin. Understand? Her lip trembled, but she nodded. And you? I gave her the faintest smile, one I hoped hid the truth. Let me worry about me. The ship's dinner bell echoed across the decks, summoning guests into glittering rooms filled with candlelight and crystal. Somewhere in that glow, the trap was already being set, and somewhere deep in me, the part that had loved and trusted them was dying quietly, making room for something else, something colder. I watched her small figure disappear into the corridor that led to the children's activity lounge, the soft soles of her sandals tapping quickly against the carpet. The moment she turned the corner, my hands curled into fists, not from anger alone, but from the weight of betrayal pressing down like an anchor. If they were willing to harm me, it meant their desperation had already rotted into something far more dangerous than greed. The atrium's golden light spilled across polished marble floors as I entered the main bar. Music drifted from a string quartet in the corner, blending with a low hum of conversation and the clinking of glass. I chose a table in the far corner, my back against the wall, every instinct sharpened. From here, I could see every entrance. I wasn't here to drink. I was here to listen. Minutes later, they arrived. Casual smiles stretched across their faces like cheap masks, each step rehearsed to look effortless. Jonas, my son, wore a tropical print shirt he'd probably bought just for this cruise, while Mara's flowing dress shimmered under the light, her perfume arriving before she did. But it was their eyes that betrayed them, calculating, measuring, waiting. Mind if we join you, Dad? Jonas didn't wait for my answer, sliding into the chair opposite. Mara leaned closer, her tone laced with false warmth. We thought a family toast before dinner would be nice. Jonas signaled to the bartender with a quick flick of his wrist. 3 glasses of Belcher Reserve. Neat, just like you always have it. I had never once asked for that brand in my life. The specificity was a tell, a script they prepared, confident I would follow my usual, trusting routine. I let the silence breathe before smiling faintly. Actually, I think I'll have ginger water tonight. The waves have been making me a little uneasy. For a split second, something flickered in Jonas's expression. It was gone almost instantly, replaced by a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. 1 drink won't hurt, Dad. Just to celebrate. Mara's voice slid in smoothly, dripping with feigned affection. Who knows when we'll all be together like this again? Their words were sugar over glass shards. And every second I sat there, the air between us thickened, not with love, but with the quiet, deadly patience of predators waiting for the perfect opening. Jonas leaned forward, elbows on the table, his smile fixed but his voice sharpening beneath it. Come on, it's tradition. You've never turned down a toast with me before. The words weren't an invitation. They were pressure, layered with a history he thought I couldn't push against. I kept my tone easy, even allowing a chuckle. Traditions change. And tonight, I'll let you two enjoy it without me. The bartender set down 2 crystal tumblers before them, amber liquid catching the light like trapped fire. Mara's hand wrapped around hers, but her eyes never left me, studying, searching for crack in my resolve. I stood, placing a few bills on the table to cover their drinks. Dinner's on me tonight. Order whatever you like. The move threw them off balance for a heartbeat. Predators expecting resistance rarely know what to do with generosity. Before they could recover, I stepped away, my shoes echoing against the marble floor as I left the bar. Instead of heading toward the dining room, I wound my way down a quieter corridor, my shadow stretching across the dim carpet under the soft sconces. By the time I reached the deck where their cabin was, the hallway was empty. I positioned myself 2 doors down, leaning casually against the wall, pretending to scroll through my phone while my ears tuned to every sound. Footsteps approached. The door to their room opened, hinges creaking faintly. Then the voices began, muffled but clear enough through the thin walls. He suspects something. Mara's tone was sharp now, the honey gone. He's never refused before. Jonas's reply was a low growl. Then we make sure he doesn't have the choice. The air in that hallway felt colder than the sea outside. Every word they spoke was another nail sealing their intent. And every second I stayed was a risk I knew I had to take. Mara's voice lowered to a hiss, but the venom in it cut through the wall. Tonight, after his walk on the upper deck, there's a blind spot near the lifeboats. No one will see. Jonas's reply was steady, almost businesslike. 15 minutes between patrol changes. That's all we need. I pressed aside my phone against the wall, the recorder app running in the background, its dark screen hiding the fact it was capturing every word. The sound of glass meeting a table followed. A sharp clink that made me imagine them leaning over a map of the deck, planning routes the way criminals study blueprints. Mara laughed then, soft but chilling, the kind of laugh that belongs to someone already picturing the aftermath. When their conversation lulled, I slipped away silently, my steps muffled by the plush carpeting. Back in my suite, the recording played over and over, each repetition stripping away the last threads of denial I'd been clinging to. There was no misunderstanding here. This was intent. Cold, deliberate intent. The life jacket hanging in the closet caught my eye, a bright orange slash against the dark wood. They thought I was a frail old man too stubborn to see what was coming. They didn't realize that every betrayal, every loss in my life, had taught me one skill they'd never expect: patience. I sat at the desk, pen in hand, and began writing a letter. Not to them. They had forfeited that right. But to Isla, in case tonight went wrong. In case my plan didn't unfold the way I needed it to. The words were simple, but each one was weighted with a truth she deserved to carry for the rest of her life. As the ink dried, the ship's horn echoed across the water, long and low. It wasn't calling passengers to dinner this time. It felt like it was calling me to choose. Run or let the trap spring. I didn't sleep that night. The waves outside my balcony whispered against the hull, but their rhythm was drowned out by the sound of their voices replaying in my head, sharpened by the recording in my pocket. Every glance from them earlier in the day now felt like a rehearsal, every smile a mask. At dawn, the harbor came into view. Pastel houses along the cliffs, water shimmering like liquid glass. Passengers buzzed with plans to the shore, clutching maps and cameras. I could have been among them, stepping onto solid ground and vanishing into safety. But safety meant leaving Isla alone with 2 people who had already rehearsed murder. She found me on the deck before I could decide. Her yellow dress fluttered in the wind, and her sandals slapped the boards as she ran. "You're still here," she said, breathless, as if she'd been checking every corner of the ship for me. Her arms wrap around me, tighter than ever before. Don't go ashore without me. Please. That was the moment I knew escape was no longer an option. If I left, I'd be running for my life, but abandoning her is the chance. And the thought of her watching them the way I had last night, hearing them whisper and plot, was something I couldn't live with. I told her I'd stay on board. The relief in her eyes was immediate. But there was something else there, too, a shadow of fear she didn't want me to see. When Jonas and Mara emerged from the ship's interior in their sun hats and bright smiles, she gripped my hand under the table at the open-air cafe. The three of us watched them step onto the gangway, and I caught the briefest flicker of their expressions changing, the quick, silent recalculation of a plan. When they vanished into the streets below, I stood and made my way to the security desk. It was time to let someone else hear that recording. Time to stop thinking like prey. The security office was tucked away behind a narrow hallway most passengers never noticed. A single glass panel looked out onto the ship's internal service deck, where crew members move with quiet efficiency. Behind the desk sat a tall man in a navy jacket, his eyes quick but steady, the kind of gaze that measured you before you spoke. I need to speak to the chief of security, I said, my voice lower than I intended. When he asked why, I didn't give him the whole story, just enough for him to pick up the phone and make the call. Within minutes, I was sitting across from a man who introduced himself as Officer Hale, a name tag pinned neatly to his chest. He leaned forward as I slid my phone across the desk and tapped the play icon. Jonas's voice spilled into the small room, cold and deliberate. 15 minutes. No one will see. Mara's followed, each word coated in ice. Make it look like he slipped. By the time the recording ended, Hale's expression had hardened. You're certain this isn't taken out of context? Context. I almost laughed. The context is my granddaughter overheard them planning to kill me, and the drink they tried to hand me last night wasn't for celebration. He didn't flinch. We can confine them to their cabin now. Alert the authorities at the next port. I shook my head. No, that only guarantees they walk off this ship someday, claiming it's all lies. I want them caught trying. His brow furrowed. You're asking to be bait. I'm saying I'd rather risk myself than leave this unfinished, or leave that child at risk. We sat there, the hum of the ventilation filling the silence, until he nodded. All right, but we do it on our terms. A plan began to take shape, shadows, timing, positions. Every detail laid out like a chessboard under dim light. As I stood to leave, the Caribbean sun flashed through the porthole, warm and golden. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the last light before the storm. That evening, the ship glided through dark water that looked like black glass, the reflection of the stars trembling across its surface. Every laugh in the lounge below, every faint clink of cutlery, felt distant, as if the world around me didn't know it was moving toward a quiet war. In my cabin, I buttoned a cardigan over a plain shirt, the kind of outfit that made me look smaller, slower, harmless. The emergency whistle rested in my pocket, its weight more real to me than the railing I would soon stand beside. Across the room, the letter for Isla lay sealed on the desk, a promise I prayed she'd never need to read. At 11:20, I stepped into the corridor. The air on the upper deck was cool, carrying the sharp scent of the ocean and the faint hum of the ship's engines below. I moved to the predetermined spot, a section of railing halfway between the lifeboats, where the shadows were deepest and the security cameras didn't quite meet. It was the place Jonas and Mara had chosen. They just didn't know. It was also the place Hale's team was waiting. A faint shuffle came from behind. Couldn't sleep, Dad? Jonas's voice tried for casual, but the stiffness betrayed him. Mara appeared on my other side, her smile barely visible in the low light. You should be careful out here, she said, her tone almost playful. The decks can be slick. They moved closer, one step at a time, their positions tightening like a noose. I kept my hand behind my back, my gaze fixed on the horizon, the whistle warm in my palm. The water below shifted and glimmered, an endless drop into cold silence. When Jonas's hand brushed my elbow, testing his grip, I finally turned to face him, my voice calm but carrying a weight I knew would land. I heard everything, every word, and you're not getting a second chance. Jonas froze mid-step, the false confidence draining from his face. His mouth opened as if to form a denial, but nothing came out. Only a flicker of panic in his eyes before he forced the mask back on. "You're imagining things," he said, his tone suddenly brittle. Mara's voice was sharper, more controlled. "You're tired. You've been reading too much into enough." My voice cut through the night air, low but solid. The drink, the railing, the patrol shift. I know it all. Jonas's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw the truth beneath performance. The calculation, the frustration of a plan unraveling. He stepped closer, his hand brushing the rail, his shadow merging with mine. "You think you can just throw accusations like that and walk away," he murmured. I raised the whistle to my lips. The sound that tore from it was piercing, slicing through the stillness of the deck and bouncing off the steel walls like a siren. Jonas lunged, but before he could touch me, a voice thundered from the shadows. "Step away from him. Now!" Officer Hale emerged from the darkness, flanked by 2 more security officers, their flashlights snapping across Jonas and Mara's startled faces. The wind picked up, tugging at my cardigan, the hum of the ship's engines suddenly louder in the charged silence. Mara's hands lifted slowly, but her eyes were still darting, searching for a way to turn this moment to her advantage. Jonas looked from the officers to me, his breath quickening. "You set us up," he said, as if the truth of his own intent had no weight at all. "No," I answered, meeting his stare without flinching. "You did that yourself." Hale's men moved in without hesitation, the metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut, slicing through the heavy night air. Jonas stiffened as his wrists were pulled behind him, his eyes fixed on mine with glare that burned with something far darker than anger. Mara didn't resist, but her expression carried a quiet venom, the look of someone already rehearsing the story she would tell later, reshaping herself into the victim. "You can't prove anything," Jonas spat, his voice low and tight. Hale didn't even glance at him. "We'll let the recording handle that." The faint shuffle of their shoes against the deck planks was the only sound as they were led toward the service elevator, the dark waves beyond the rail rolling on without care. When the last of the flashlight beams disappeared into the corridor, the stillness returned, but it wasn't the same. The deck smelled of salt and tension, the night air sharp in my lungs. I leaned on the rail for a moment, my pulse finally slowing, though not from relief, because even with them in custody, I knew the story wasn't over. A faint echo reached me from the stairwell. Jonas's voice, just loud enough to carry. "This isn't the end, old man. You'll see." The words dissolved into the hum of the ship, but they settled in my chest like a stone. I stood there alone, the whistle still in my hand, the vast black ocean stretching out before me. Somewhere inside, the part of me that had once believed in family above all else felt like it had been quietly lowered into that water and left to sink. But above that grief, one truth remained. I wasn't a prey anymore. I didn't return to my cabin right away. The hallways felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you wonder what's waiting around the next corner. Instead, I walked a long way around, past closed lounges and shuttered gift shops, letting the hum of the engines anchor me to something steady. When I finally stepped inside, the letter for Isla was still on the desk where I'd left it. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand. It no longer felt like a goodbye. Now it felt like a reminder of why I'd stayed on this ship instead of running. I slid it into the drawer, knowing it would remain there, sealed, until the day I was truly gone. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the balcony doors, catching the faint salt on the glass. I found Isla at the children's breakfast area, her laughter spilling out between spoonfuls of fruit. She spotted me instantly, her grin lighting up her whole face. "Grandpa, they're making pancakes shaped like dolphins." I smiled, but I could see the flicker in her gaze, the unspoken question. "Your mom and dad are resting in their cabin," I told her gently. She tilted her head, studying me as though she knew there was more I wasn't saying. But then she simply said, "Then it's just us today?" "Just us," I replied, and for the first time in days, the words felt safe. As we walked out onto the deck, the ocean stretched around us, vast and unbroken. But even with Jonas and Mara confined, I knew confinement wasn't the same as change. Some people will wait years for an opportunity to strike again, and I could feel it, deep down, that our reckoning wasn't finished. We spent the day as if the ship belonged only to us. Isla chased the spray of the water fountains on the pool deck, her laughter carried away by the wind. I trailed behind with quiet watchfulness, scanning every corner, every passing crew member, unable to silence a part of me that knew danger rarely vanishes. It just waits. By the afternoon, we found ourselves in the library, sunlight spilling across the carpet in golden stripes. She curled into the armchair opposite mine, a book balanced on her knees, glancing up every so often as if to make sure I was still there. And I was, though my mind kept drifting to the lower decks where her parents sat locked away, plotting the next move they might one day take. That night, I stood on the balcony after she had fallen asleep, the hum of the ship steady beneath my feet. The stars were scattered above like fragments of something broken yet beautiful. I thought about how quickly life can shift. One moment you're a grandfather on a holiday, the next you're the target of those you raised. Somewhere in the shadows below, I imagined Jonas pacing, whispering to Mara in tones too low to carry, their minds already working the edges of their confinement. And I knew, as sure as I knew the tide would rise, that this was only a pause in storm. The only question left was how ready I would be when it broke again. Morning came with a slow roll of waves and sunlight that crept across the cabin floor like it was testing the space. Isla was already up, sitting cross-legged on the bed with her hair in a wild halo, telling me all the things she wanted to see before we reached the next port. Her innocence was so complete that, for a moment, I let myself believe we could finish the voyage without another shadow falling over us. But shadows don't need permission. They find cracks in the brightest hours. When I took her to breakfast, I saw in the way a junior crewman glanced toward me and then quickly away, his eyes carrying something he wasn't saying. In the quiet of the hallway, a steward I didn't recognize lingered a little too long outside the restricted deck where Jonas and Mara were being kept. I kept my smile for Isla, answering her questions about dolphins and coral reefs, but inside, every nerve was coiled. Confined didn't mean powerless. A determined mind could turn any lock into an inconvenience. And if Jonas had been thinking about this for days, maybe years, then I couldn't afford to underestimate him now. That evening, as Isla played in the children's lounge, I walked the long curve of the observation deck alone. The horizon was fading to silver, the last trace of daylight slipping away. And in that in-between light, I caught my own reflection in the glass. Older, harder, but not broken. I realized the danger hadn't ended with the handcuffs. It had only changed shape. Somewhere deep in the belly of the ship, they were still waiting. And if they found their way out, they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The hum of the engines beneath my feet had always been a steady comfort, but tonight it felt heavier, slower, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. I walked past the panoramic windows, where moonlight spilled across the water, my reflection pacing alongside me in the glass. Somewhere below, two people I had once trusted with my life were counting the hours, maybe even the minutes, until they saw daylight again. At dinner, Isla chattered about the scavenger hunt she'd joined earlier, holding up a keychain prize like it was treasure from the deep. I smiled, laughed when I needed to, but kept one ear on the room. The subtle movements of staff, the murmurs of crew conversations that stopped when I passed. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. And instinct was telling me that whatever piece I bought with a confinement was already running out. Later, as I escorted her back to the lounge for a movie night, I caught sight of Hale at the far end of the hallway. He didn't approach, but the way his gaze lingered told me more than words could. Something was shifting behind the scenes. Something he didn't want to say with her in earshot. When I returned alone, he was waiting by the stairwell. "They've been persistent," he said quietly, glancing toward the secure deck. "Requests for phone access, messages to crew they know. Nothing we can act on yet, but enough to keep eyes open." I nodded, my jaw tightening. Eyes open, I repeated, knowing it wasn't just an instruction for him. It was a reminder for myself. Because the truth was simple, and it pressed against me like the cold wind off the bow. Locks can be picked. Guards can be distracted. And if they found a way back onto this deck, I knew I wouldn't get the luxury of another warning. That night, the ship seemed quieter than usual, too quiet for a vessel carrying thousands of passengers. The corridors felt stretched, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding in a secret. Even the low thrum of the engine sounded muffled, like the heartbeat of something bracing for impact. I walked the observation deck alone, the sea below black and endless. The moon broke through the clouds, silver in the rails, and in its glow I caught sight of my own hands. Steady but not calm. Somewhere inside the ship, Jonas and Mara were supposed to be locked away. Yet the unease in my chest whispered that bars meant little to people who could slip through cracks like smoke. When I returned to the main atrium, Hale was there, leaning on a rail above the staircase. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just gave me a single, deliberate nod. I climbed the steps toward him, my shoes echoing on the marble, until I stood close enough to hear his voice drop. "They've been asking about you," he said. "Not in front of my team, but through others. Crew members they think they can sway." I felt the heat of anger rise, slow and deliberate, but I kept my voice even. "They're not done. Not even close." Hale's jaw set. "That's why neither are we." As I made my way back to my cabin, the hallway lights flickered once, a brief, almost imperceptible pulse. It could have been nothing, but as I reached for my door handle, a thought rooted itself deep and cold. Maybe they weren't waiting for freedom to find me. Maybe freedom was already on its way. The handle was cold beneath my fingers, colder than it should have been. I turned it slowly, the door swinging open to the dim light of the cabin. Everything looked as I'd left it. The neatly folded blanket on the bed, the sealed letter in the desk drawer. Yet something in the air felt disturbed, like the faint scent of stranger's cologne in a familiar room. I stepped inside without switching on the main light, letting my eyes adjust to the glow from the balcony. That's when I saw it. The smallest detail, but enough to still my breath. One of the chair legs was angled slightly toward the door. I never left it that way. The sliding balcony door was locked, yet the faintest smear of salt across the glass suggested it had been opened recently. I moved closer, scanning the deck beyond, but the moonlit sea was empty. Still, the unease threaded deeper, curling low in my stomach. On the nightstand, my emergency whistle was gone. I'd left it there after the confrontation, a choice I now realized was careless. It hadn't fallen. It hadn't been misplaced. It had been taken. I stood very still, listening. Somewhere in the quiet belly of the ship, I could feel it, the slow, patient beat of someone else's timing. And in that moment, I knew the truth. They weren't waiting for the end of the voyage. They were moving now. I didn't call Hale immediately. If they had been inside my cabin once, they could be close enough now to hear the conversation. Instead, I closed the balcony curtains in one slow, measured motion, shutting out the moonlight and any prying eyes. The missing whistle wasn't just a warning. It was a message. They wanted me to know they could reach me, even with steel doors and guard between us. It meant either someone had helped them or someone had been paid enough to look the other way. I scanned the room again, every detail under a mental microscope. No drawers rifled, no obvious theft. Just the chair, the salt trace, and the absence of that small, shrill voice of rescue. They hadn't taken anything of value. They'd taken the thing that stood between me and the edge of the deck. A sound broke the stillness, faint, metallic, from somewhere out in the hallway. Not footsteps, not a door. Something softer, like the brush of metal against fabric. I moved aside of the door, pressing my back to the wall, listening as it came again, then stopped. The air felt heavier, tighter. And I realized with absolute clarity, they weren't sending warnings anymore. The next sound might be the door opening. The hallway outside my door had gone silent again, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but loaded. I stayed where I was, breathing slow, letting my ears adjust until even the faint hum of the ship's ventilation became part of the background. If someone was there, they were patient. And patience was the most dangerous weapon of all. A soft scrape broke the stillness. Not metal this time. Rubber, like the sole of a shoe shifting for better balance. My hand hovered over the latch, not to open it, but to lock it tighter, testing for any give. It held. For now, I reached for the lamp and switched it on, not to chase shadows, but to send a message of my own. I was awake and waiting. A minute passed, then another. The quiet stretched until it almost felt safe again. Almost. Then, faintly, from somewhere farther down the hall, came the muted click of a cabin door shutting. Whoever had been there hadn't knocked, hadn't tried to come in. They just wanted me to know they were close enough to. It was a game now, one move for one move. And I understood exactly what they were telling me. There wouldn't be another warning. I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't dare. The hum of the engines and the occasional creak of the hull became markers of time. Each sound another reminder that somewhere on this ship, the danger wasn't contained. It was watching. By dawn, I was already dressed and sitting at the small desk, the untouched letter to Isla lying in front of me again. I traced the edges of the envelope with my thumb, wondering if she would ever have to read it. The thought alone hardened something inside me. I couldn't let this voyage end with her carrying the weight of a story that should never belong to a child. At breakfast, she was all light and excitement, telling me about the day's scavenger hunt. I smiled, laughed when I should, and listened with half an ear while my eyes scanned the dining room. One of the stewards passed close by. Too close, his eyes dipping to the table and back to mine with a flicker of recognition that he didn't try to hide. After dropping Isla at the lounge, I found Hale on the observation deck. I had someone outside my door last night. I told him. His expression didn't change, but his stance shifted weight forward, eyes narrowing just enough for me to know he believed me. You think they're still in confinement? I asked. I think confinement isn't the same as control, he replied. The wind off the sea caught my breath as I turned toward the endless water. It was beautiful, and it was a perfect place for something or someone to disappear. Hale's words stayed with me long after he walked away. Confinement isn't the same as control. It looped in my mind like the low churn of propellers beneath our feet, steady and unrelenting. I decided not to return to my cabin right away. Instead, I walked the ship in long, deliberate circuits, through the quiet lounges, past the empty shuffleboard courts, down the narrow crew service corridors where the scent of metal and detergent lingered. It was in one of those service corridors that I saw it, a faint trail of damp footprints leading from a door marked Staff Access Only. They were too large for crew's shoes, and one set dragged slightly at the heel, as if the person wearing them was in a hurry, but didn't want to be heard. I followed them until they faded into the polished deck near the maintenance lifts. From there, I couldn't tell which direction they'd taken, but I knew this much. They hadn't been left by anyone on duty. Someone had been moving where passengers weren't supposed to be. Someone who knew the ship well enough to vanish. By the time I reached the children's lounge to collect Isla, the decision was already made. We'd stay visible in public spaces under the gaze of witnesses, because if they couldn't reach me, they might try her. She skipped toward me, hair flying, holding a drawing of the two of us standing under a sun the size of half the page. "Look, Grandpa, I made us bigger than the ship." I smiled, but my eyes swept the room one last time before we left. In the far corner, near the craft table, a man I didn't recognize was pretending to study a notice board. And when he saw me looking, he turned away just a fraction too slowly. I kept Isla close as we stepped out into the main atrium, where the glittering chandeliers swayed ever so slightly with the motion of the sea. Music from the lounge above drifted down, soft, harmless, yet every note felt like a veil over something darker. My mind replayed the man's slow turn, the way his shoulder dipped as if concealing something under his jacket. We settled at a cafe table near the glass railing. Isla busied herself with her crayons while I kept my gaze fixed on the upper deck, scanning every passerby. Twice, I thought I saw him again, once reflected in the mirror column beside the piano, once in the shifting shadows at the stairwell, but both times he was gone before I could be sure. It was as though the ship itself was helping him hide. A sudden chime sounded overhead, the kind meant for crew announcements, yet no voice followed. Passengers barely noticed, but I saw a steward's head snap toward the service corridor before he quickly resumed his smile. Moments later, a different man, older, salt in his beard, appear behind the bar, whispering something to bartender before glancing, just once, in my direction. That look wasn't curiosity. It was assessment. Isla tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, why are we staying here? You keep looking around like you lost something." I forced a smile and told her we were waiting for sunset, but my pulse was pounding. Somewhere on this ship, someone was moving in patterns that didn't belong to a tourist. And if I was right, we had already been noticed. The sun dipped lower, spilling a molten trail across the water, and the lounge lights dimmed in response. A violinist began playing near the spiral staircase, her bow gliding in slow, haunting strokes that made the air feel heavier. I kept my eyes on the balcony above, certain I'd catch movement, and then I did. The bearded man from the bar leaned over the railing, his posture casual, too casual. A waiter passed by with a silver tray, and in that fleeting reflection, I caught another figure standing just behind him, tall, shoulders squared, head slightly tilted, as if listening to something only he could hear. When I blinked, he was gone, replaced by a laughing couple taking selfies against the glass. But my skin prickled. The human mind knows when it's being hunted. Isla pushed her sketchbook toward me, showing a picture she'd just drawn. The deck, the sea, and a shadowy man at the rail, his face hidden. I stared at it longer than I should have. "How do you know about him?" I asked quietly. She frowned, almost confused. "Because he's been watching us since lunch." The violinist song ended, applause rippled, and in the hush that followed, the overhead chime rang again. Still no announcement, only silence thick enough to make you feel every heartbeat in your chest. And in that stillness, I finally saw where they wanted us to go. I slid the sketchbook back toward her, my voice low enough to be swallowed by the hum of the ship. "Stay close to me," I said, though my eyes kept drifting to the balcony where I'd last seen that shape. The crowd's laughter and conversation suddenly felt like a disguise, noise to cover the quiet steps of someone who didn't want to be noticed. From the corner of my vision, a crew member in a crisp white jacket moved through the tables, slipping something into a guest's hand before vanishing down a side corridor. No one else seemed to notice. The air had shifted, warmer, heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the polished floor louder than I intended, and Isla instinctively reached for my arm. We stepped out onto the open deck, the wind wrapping around us with a salty bite. Far below, the ocean churned against the liner's hull, black and endless. The hum of the engines throbbed beneath our feet, a reminder that this floating world was still moving forward, even if I wasn't sure toward what. Somewhere ahead, a single light flickered against the railing, then went out. Behind us, the chime rang again. Still no voice, no instructions. Just a hollow echo that made the deck feel emptier than it was. And in that moment, I realized the next place they would force us toward would be impossible to return from. The deck was darker now, as if the ship itself had decided to hide what was about to happen. That flicker of light I'd seen before returned, not steady, but in pulses, as though someone was signaling from the far end of the liner. Isla's grip on my sleeve tightened, and in her eyes, I saw not fear but certainty. She knew something she hadn't told me. We moved toward the glow, our footsteps swallowed by the wind. Halfway there, a shadow separated from the railing and stepped directly into our path. It was the same crew member I had glimpsed earlier, his cap pulled low, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You shouldn't be here," he said. And before I could ask why, the chime rang again, but this time it wasn't from the ship speakers. It was right behind us. We spun, and the source of sound stepped into the light. Not a passenger, not anyone in uniform, a figure in a deep gray coat, eyes fixed on me as though they'd been waiting for this exact moment. In their hand, the same silver token Isla had been hiding in her sketchbook. They raised it slowly, and the crew member between us suddenly stepped aside, giving them a clear path. Isla's voice was so quiet, I almost missed it under the wind. "They're not here for me. Grandpa, they're here for you." The air between us felt charged, like the space before a lightning strike. The stranger's gaze locked on mine, unblinking, and for a moment the hum of the ship seemed to vanish entirely. They took one slow step forward, and the silver token in their hand caught the dim light. flashing briefly before disappearing back into shadow. I felt Isla move closer to me, her hand pressing against my back, not for comfort, but as if ready to push me toward something. The crew member, who only seconds ago seemed ready to block our path, now stood perfectly still, his eyes flicking nervously between the stranger and me. It was as though some silent agreement had passed between them, one I was never supposed to witness. The figure's voice came low, each word deliberate, like a verdict being read. You've carried it long enough. Tonight, it comes back to where it belongs. A cold rush of memory hit me. Flashes of another voyage, another storm, and a promise I'd made to someone I never thought I'd see again. The token, I knew it, not from Isla, not from now, but from a night buried so far in my past that speaking of it would have cost me more than I could bear. And now, here it was, held by a hand that clearly knew exactly what it meant. Before I could speak, the ship tilted slightly, a swell hitting us broadside. The motion pushed us all toward the railing, and for a split second, I saw the open sea below, black, endless, waiting. The stranger extended their hand toward me, not in greeting, but in demand. And from behind me, Isla whispered something so faint, so trembling it chilled my blood. If you take it, we won't be coming back. The world around me seemed to shrink until there was nothing but that hand, the token, and the weight of every unspoken truth pressing against my chest. The sea roared below, the night air thick with salt and tension, and somewhere deep inside, I knew that the choice I made here would not just decide my fate. It would decide hers too. Isla's fingers tightened on my back, not to restrain me, but as if bracing herself for the impact of whatever came next. My breath slowed. The token wasn't just a relic. It was a seal, a key, a curse I had kept hidden for decades under the false comfort of silence. And now, this figure, this ghost in the flesh, was demanding I unseal it. For a heartbeat, I considered dropping it into the ocean, letting the sea claim it forever, but even that felt like playing into someone else's hands. The truth was, there was no escape. I reached forward. The moment my skin brushed the cold metal, a jolt, like an electric current, shot through me, dragging fragments of memory to the surface. A younger me, standing on another deck, in another storm, swearing to guard something until the tide turned in their favor. I remember the face I'd made that promise to, pale from illness, eyes burning with desperation, and I remembered failing them. The ship groaned as if under some unseen weight, the water below frothing unnaturally. The stranger's eyes searched mine, not with malice, but with something almost worse, recognition. It's time, they said simply, as if the ocean itself had been waiting for this exchange. And then, without warning, they stepped backward into the dark, falling over the rail, vanishing into the black churn without a single cry. I froze. Isla's voice was trembling now, her grip like iron. "Don't look down," she whispered, but it was too late. I'd already seen. The place where the stranger fell wasn't empty water anymore. It was a circle of stillness in the storm, a shape rising from beneath, vast and glistening, breaking the surface in slow, deliberate silence. The air tasted like metal. The ship, for all its size, felt suddenly small, fragile, and deeply, terrifyingly mortal. And as that thing, that impossible, ancient thing, emerged far enough of the moonlight to kiss its surface, I realized the truth. The token had never been mine to keep, but returning it meant opening a door I could never close again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because the eyes looking back at me from the water were not human, and they remembered me,